In this series of videos, I'm going to put together a collection of short animation clips using layer shapes in After Effects. You can see some of the types of things that we're going to work on here, kind of morphing vector shapes, animating their properties, and looking at possibilities with vector shapes in After Effects. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to grab a new composition, a new project, and add a new composition to it. I'm going to work 1200 by 1200 and just in little short compositions today. And in each little composition, I'm going to show maybe one or two techniques. And then at the end, we'll put them all together into one sequence. I'm going to call this one Animating a Square. Good a name as any. Click OK. Alright, so you probably will have kind of encountered the tools that we use to make vectors or shapes in After Effects, given that we've done some masking work. They're up here, and we've got a Bezier pen tool, and we've got a series of kind of shape, polygon, ellipse shape tools there. Let's make a shape. So I'm going to go down to my canvas, and I'm going to draw in a square. Now, we make a shape layer if we don't have anything else selected. So previously we've made masks, and we need to have a footage item layer selected to make that mask. If nothing's selected on the in our layer stack, we'll actually make a shape layer like this, and we'll end up with a new layer in the layer palette with this little icon here. It'll be called shape layer. I'm going to rename this one, hitting return on the keyboard, and I'm going to call this one square. You can see that I've drawn out a square on the stage. Okay, a couple of things to notice across here. We've got a fill property across our contextual menu, and we've got a stroke property. So let's explore those. I'm going to click on the fill there, and we've got a couple of fill options here. We can have no fill, we can have solid fill, or we can have a couple of different types of gradient fill. Let me just show you. Sorry, didn't have that selected. Need to have our layer selected for that to work. And let me just change that to a gradient, like so. And I'll change it back to a solid. And to change the color of the fill, we've got a color picker, and we can change it to whatever color we want. Currently, I've got a stroke on this shape here, which is cool. I can also have a gradient stroke like we can do in Illustrator. I'll change the opacity. I'm not going to do that at the moment. In fact, I don't want a stroke for this demonstration. But I will show you that you can change the stroke width by changing that value there down to 30. But I'm going to turn it off like that and go OK. So I want a blue square for this first demonstration. So excellent, we can see a few kinds of control points on the page there. It can be pretty confusing as to what all of these control points are because they change depending on what you have selected. So hopefully we can get to the bottom of that. Shapes can be pretty confusing because there are a lot of kind of properties that you can alter with a shape. Let's explore some of those. We can see in our layers here, I have one shape and I can twirl down its properties. And the first level of properties that I have there, we'll skip down to the transform properties. Now this is the transform properties of the layer, and so these are the transformations that we're quite familiar with: position, scale, rotation and opacity. So P on the keyboard, position, etc. Scale, rotation and opacity. And that's the whole layer. And inside the layer, we actually have the contents of the layer, which is the shape itself. So let's twirl that down and I can see we've got a rectangle inside that layer, which is cool. And you can actually have multiple shapes and multiple vectors inside one layer, and they call that a layer group. We're just going to muck around with this one rectangle at this stage. You can see here that we do have our fill and stroke properties that were up here, so we can alter them on the timeline. So that might suggest to you that we can animate those properties. If I have to look at the fill, I can see that we have little stopwatches next to some of those items there, which means that we can animate them over time. So inside the rectangle, we've got more properties. We've got the rectangle path. Let's just have a look at that. The size here. Now I haven't quite got a square. I didn't hold shift down there, so I'm going to alter that and change that to a 500 by 500 pixel square, which is good. I can change the position of the item, and that's of the rectangle, and that's changing the position in relation to its in relation to the rectangle's anchor point. So we've actually got a couple of different position properties for the contents of this square layer. So down here we can see that we've also got the transformation properties for rectangle 1. So we can change anchor point position, scale, skew, rotation and opacity of that rectangle. Under here, the position of this rectangle path is in relation to the anchor point of the rectangle. And I know that that's a little bit confusing, but you'll get the hang of it as you go on. I actually want to change the position of my rectangle here to get it right in the center. You can see it's sitting at 40 and 58.2 on the X and Y. If I adjust them to 0 and 0, I'm going to get my rectangle right in the center of the stage there. Okay, I think it's time that we should animate this shape layer on the stage. To start with, I'm going to animate its size in relation to its current transformation. So I'm going to just twirl that up and look at the path. So we'll animate the path. So over the period of 2 seconds, I want to actually increase the size of our rectangle. So that's actually changing the size of the path, so the space between each of those points. I'll make it up to 650. So now we can see if I preview that, we can see it increase in size. Now, one of the great things I'll just mention about working with shape layers is that they render fast. So if your machine's not that powerful, working with shapes is probably going to be quite good for you. Let's do some other animation to our square here. So we increase this actual size of the vector. Let's transform the vector as a whole, and I'm going to do that using the rotation property here. I've just added a keyframe for rotation and another keyframe at 1 second. I'm going to add a complete rotation in there. So as it moves through that 1 second, it's going to rotate and then stop, but continue to move towards us. So that's kind of cool. Interesting property is the roundness of a rectangle. So I'm going to keyframe that, or just change that property there, and you can see that we can get some rounded corners on a rectangle. And if I pull it all the way across, it's going to give us a circle. So I'm going to keyframe that, and just right at the end here, as the square gets right round to the its full revolution, I'm going to change this property here or that keyframe, pull that out until we get to a circle. So around about, it's half of that value, isn't it? So probably a bit less, 300. Okay, so great. And it kind of morphs into a circle, which is cool, and then keeps growing. Excellent. So rectangle path and the transform rectangle. And as we looked at before, the stroke and the fill can also be animated. So when this guy goes from changing from a square to a circle, I want to change its color. So I can keyframe its color. From that keyframe, I'll make a new keyframe up here. And I can simply use the color picker to modify that color, and you can see now that it will kind of blend from blue through green and into yellow. Alright, so that's our first little animation, and we've put a shape on the stage, and we've started manipulating some of the very particular properties that shape layers have.